So tanks really, really suck right now, and they've sucked. They've been terrible for the last um, 2 years. So this year and 2021, and the reason for that has been because of the item rework. And I'm a tank player. I play Thresh, Maokai. I would consider both of those champions to be tanks. I've also played Nautilus and Leona, so mainly those four champs. All tanky characters. Okay, and I've been playing League of Legends off and on since season 3, but mainly since season 7. And in season 7, 8, 9, and 10, tanks were all fairly strong. They weren't overpowering and they weren't dominant, but they were strong, right? And then we got the season 11 item rework, and that item rework has made tanks completely irrelevant aside from a very early point in the item rework. So early on in the item rework, when it first dropped, all the tanks were abusing Sunfire Cape or Sunfire Aegis. That's what it's called now. It used to be called Sunfire Cape. And it gave 450 health and I think 30 armor and MR, and it had a ton of damage on it. Like the base damage was ridiculously high, and then of course it stacked to become even higher. And so all the tanks in the game were abusing it, and they had really high win rates. And this went on, I think, for, I don't know, maybe a few weeks, and then that was patched. Okay, so Sunfire got nerfed twice, and then after it got nerfed twice, tanks have been terrible in every way outside of support. And they've been terrible in top. They have been terrible in jungle. There are very few tanks that play mid, but they're terrible in mid. Uh, in bot, I don't think they're very good in bot either. And there's only a few tanks that play in bot, like Tahm Kench with Senna. But outside of that, outside of support, mainly, tanks are just not very good. And the reason for this is, and a lot of people have talked about this, like the Boffs, and others. The reason for it is there's nothing you can freaking do as a tank, item wise. There is nothing that you can do in 9 out of 10 games. I mean, hey, before the item rework came out, if you were against a full AD comp as a tank, okay, that's just free, right? Because these full AD champions, right? I mean, they're doing like 90, 99% physical damage for the most part, with a few exceptions. And then now with the item rework, everyone can do whatever damage that they want. You can have a Quinn building Kraken Slayer. Quinn has no true damage in her kit. She has 0. See this? This is a 0. She has 0 true damage in her kit. There is none of it. You can go to the wiki page. If you don't believe me, you can go to the wiki page. There is 0. This is another 0. 0, I like my 0. There is 0 true damage in Quinn's kit. Okay? And I think the other day I was playing Maokai versus Quinn, which is a terrible lane, at least in the early parts of the game. You think, oh, you think you'd outscale, right? You just build full armor versus her, and she's useless. Well, that's wrong, because Quinn now has access to Kraken Slayer, which scales with AD. So the more AD she builds, she does more true damage. And she's literally just doing true damage to me. Like it'll be a damage recap, for example, Maokai versus Quinn. It'll be like 1,000 physical damage and 1,000 true damage. And now it's flat true damage, so I can build health to kind of deal with this. But here's the thing. In order for tanks to deal with Kraken Slayer, they need 2 items. They need Frozen Heart to slow attack speed, which reduces the amount of true damage that's being dealt, because you have to get a lot of autos in for that true damage to really matter, right? And so you have to build Frozen Heart, and you have to build like Warmog's armor, for example, which is a ton of health, or Anathema's Chains isn't actually as good for dealing with true damage. But those two items are the main two items you would need to deal with the true damage from one marksman item. One marksman item. Okay? But and that's the absurdity here. It's like before the item rework, Quinn never kills Maokai unless she's really, really fed or he's really, really behind, because the Maokai will literally just build, let's say, Sunfire, Tabbies, Randuins, whatever. Okay? Because Quinn is kind of like a marksman slash assassin, right? And Maokai is a full tank. Well, the marksman slash assassin is not supposed to kill a full tank unless they're really far ahead of the full tank, right? Like that would make sense. But in terms of the classes, the tank is supposed to counter, this full AD, very squishy champion, right? That is what is supposed to be happening here. The tank is supposed to counter that. But because of the item rework, in this particular example, it's like, okay, well, I built a bunch of armor, but that's totally useless because now they have Kraken Slayer. So now I've got to build health, but I've also got to build Frozen Heart, which doesn't give health, but it slows their attack speed, which reduces the Kraken Slayer damage. And it's just a big clusterfuck, It's like, and then you run into this issue all the time. Caitlyn doing true damage, Jinx doing true damage, right, with Kraken Slayer. Twitch doing true damage with Kraken Slayer. Now Twitch has some true damage in his kit, but he gets even more true damage with Kraken Slayer, and I think true damage mainly comes from his AP build. So, but correct me if I'm wrong about that. But it's just all these champions who you should be able to naturally counter as a tank, unless they're really far ahead, and you can't really do that anymore. Not as well as you used to. Okay, and then there's a bunch of other shit in there, like Lord Dominic's Regards is a lot stronger in season 11 item rework and season 12 than it was in season 10. Okay, it's now got like percent max HP physical damage on top of the very high amount of armor pen that it gives. Okay, so right, and this didn't exist with prior iterations of Lord Doms, and it actually used to not even be total percent armor pen. I mean, yeah, percent armor pen. It used to be like bonus percent armor pen, which isn't as good. And so, you've got that going on, and and that punishes you for building health. Like in the example that I gave, say an ADC is building Kraken Slayer versus you. Well, you need obviously armor, because Kraken Slayer, the item itself, is a mixed damage item. Is physical and true damage on that item. Okay, and the true damage scales with physical damage. So, well, with AD. So you'd have to build, armor, obviously, and then you'd have to build Frozen Heart, because the item also gives attack speed. So you have to itemize against those three things: physical, true damage, and attack speed. Okay, and so you need like a Warmog's armor, because Anathema's Chains doesn't apply to true damage. Warmog's is better. And then you also need oh god, I'm sorry. Well, yeah, and so you get all those three things, right? And then you get punished by Lord Dominic's, which applies percent armor pen. Well, the only counter to 2% armor pen is to actually stack a ton of armor. I'm not sure what the exact threshold is, but like around, let's say, 300 armor, right? And above, for example, you actually start countering the percent pen. It's not as good versus that, versus, let's say, 100 armor. And the reason for that is the way damage reduction works. But the point being that if you build Warmog's armor, for example, well, that counters the true damage, but it doesn't counter, because it's flat true damage, but it doesn't counter the percent max health physical damage that you're going to be taking, right? And so you need to build more armor to deal with that. Otherwise, whatever armor you do have, let's say you have 150 armor, you're going to get shredded by physical damage. So it's just a big clusterfuck, in that respect. And it didn't used to be that way. It used to be, okay, if I'm against Caitlyn, if I'm against Quinn, if I'm against Twitch, if I'm against Jinx, right? You can build Frozen Heart, you can build Randuin's, you can build Thornmail, Sunfire, Tabbies, bam. Bada bing, bada boom, right? You can still do that, but now you have a risk of being shredded by true damage. You have a risk, and Lord Doms is obviously significantly stronger. So it's a lot easier for those champions to kick your ass, right? And, so there's that. And then on top of all these things, it's like, okay, now we got like tanks and top lane. Well, tanks and top lane are terrible. Tanks and top lane are awful. It's like, why isn't Maokai or Nautilus? Why aren't they seen in top anymore? The reason why they're not seen in top anymore is because a lot of their items are worse, and that makes the matchups harder, obviously. And then the other thing is that they don't have any mana. Where are they going to get mana from? Abyssal Mask used to give mana, doesn't give mana anymore. Rod of Ages used to be an item that gave mana, doesn't give mana anymore. And I mean, it's not really a tank item, but it's just an example. And then Iceborne Gauntlet, which is now Frostfire Gauntlet, that used to give mana, doesn't give mana anymore. So those are just 3 examples off the top of my head. Another one's Righteous Glory, used to give mana, doesn't give mana anymore. Those 2 champs I listed, Nautilus and Maokai, are super mana hungry, right? And when you look at their items, well, there's nothing. It's literally just Frozen Heart, and then Fimbulwinter, which is terrible because Fimbulwinter forces you to stack tier. Tanks hate sitting on tier because it offers them no defensive stats whatsoever. Tanks love items like Glacial Shroud, which give them mana, as well as armor. Or they liked Catalyst of the Protector, which gave health and it gave mana. Okay, and so those 2 items were the bread and butter of a lot of tank builds, let's say in season 10 or season 9 and most all the seasons before that, right? And it's like, now you literally have nothing. You have nothing. And that's a real problem, and when we talk about anti-tank items, well, a lot of bruisers, they have more anti-tank items than ever before, and their anti-tank items are really, really good. For example, Camille, right, has Divine Sunder. In fact, there's a whole bunch of Sunder abusers in the game, and tanks cannot deal with that item. I hate that item. As a tank player, I hate that item. It makes no sense. It makes no sense to add Divine Sunder into the game, and I will tell you why. Because Camille, for example, was a tank shredder before Divine Sunder was added into the game. Now she's just better at being a tank shredder, which makes no sense. Makes no sense because now, beforehand, there was a counter to Camille, which was building health. If you built a ton of health and tabbies, which block her true damage, you could deal with her. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a solution. It's like, okay, if I build Warmogs, she's dealing flat true damage. It's not going to do as much of my health, right? Because I've built Warmogs or whatever. Now it's literally pointless. There's nothing you can do. It's percent health true damage that she does because of her interaction with Divine Sunderer, and that has never been fixed. It has never been fixed. This has been going on for over a year and a half, really more about 2 years, that she's just been able to absolutely rip tanks apart. No counterplay to it whatsoever. There's nothing you can do about it. Okay, and then that's not including just like for Camille or anyone who uses Sunderer, the percent armor and magic penetration that the item gives you, just for free. It's a free stat. You get percent armor and magic pen. And then, of course, the healing, which is another bit of cancer that, I'll talk about in another video, the whole healing problem, which is a nightmare. But, there's Divine Sunderer, and then you've got Blade of the Ruined King, which I consider kind of a bruiser marksman hybrid item, which is strong, which was very strong before season 11. It has continued to be very strong in season 11. There's too much AD. There's too much percent max HP. damage that it does. I mean, Aurelia can literally auto you like 3 times as a tank now, and you will lose like half of your HP. Like, let's say at level 9 or whatever, whenever she gets the item, right? And it's awful. It's very unfun to play against. And you need like 3 items to counter Blade of the Ruined King as a tank. You need Tabbies, you need Frozen Heart, and you need like Thornmail, for countering the healing, I guess. Um, and so there's all that stuff, and then like for and here's the whole list of Sunder abusers, if you were just wondering. Fiora is a Sunder Herb user. Camille, obviously. Jax is a Sunder Herb user. In fact, I'm going to load up the u.gg page because I lose track of the number of Sunder Herb users out there. Wukong is another one. He's also a Sunder Herb user, and um, I'm actually going to talk about this for a little bit because this is important. Okay, so Darius can use Sunder. I don't know how often Darius players actually build that item, but he can use it. Riven players don't tend to build it. They tend to build Gore Drinker. I'm looking at the tier list of the best characters in top right now. Poppy can use it, but she's a tank that uses that item. And then let's see, Trundle, he can definitely use it. And Garen doesn't use it. Let's see. Nasus uses it. And then that's about it, actually, just from the list on here. But of those champions, right, that I listed who are Sunder abusers, okay, well, how many of them have, armor and magic pen or true damage or whatever? Well, Darius has his true damage with his ult, right? And I think he's also got % armor pen. Fiora obviously has her true damage. She's a huge tank killer. Wukong has a ton of armor penetration. Camille is a true damage dealer. And then, let's see, you've got, we go down the list here. Trundle has, I think, he's a tank killer. I can't remember exactly what he has in his kit, but he is a tank killer for sure. Yorick, actually, I forgot to mention Yorick. He uses Sunderer. He's also a tank killer. And then you've got Nasus, who has armor penetration, quite a bit of it. He's a tank killer, and that's built into his kit. Okay, so that's built into his kit. And so just those champions, those are mostly popular champions. Trundle, not so much. But most of those are popular, frequently played champions in top. Okay? And a lot of them are doing quite well right now. And tanks, struggled against most of those champions before Season 11, before they got access to bullshit like Divine Sunderer. And now that that's in the game, it's like, okay, well, these champs not only get more pen, but they also get, % max HP physical damage on a auto attack. Whereas before they would have to rely on stuff like Triforce, which was flat damage. And so if you built HP and if you built armor, well, it would counter Triforce, right? Versus now, where if you build HP and if you build armor, well, it doesn't really counter Divine Sunderer because it's just a bullshit item. It completely gimps tanks. And it's unfair because it's built on a lot of champions who are already good at countering tanks. I mean, freaking Jax, the dude doesn't stop hitting you and he jumps on you all the time and he does a crap ton of damage, mixed damage, I might add, which is a direct counter to tanks. And now he also gets access to Divine Sunder. It's like, okay, what do you do? What do you do? And then he can blow Blade of the Ruined King or something, and Death's Dance. And not only can you never kill him, you can never fight him. And then, you got Nasus. No clue why he even has access to Divine Sunderer. Nothing you can do to him as a tank, especially if you're stuck in his freaking Spirit Fire at any point. That'll shave off like 100 armor, and Camille, Fiora, Wukong, all those other champs. It's just complete, it's just total absurdity. And then you got stuff like Riffmaker. And I'm going to complain about Riffmaker not because Riffmaker is a super broken item. I'm going to complain about Riffmaker because it's a toxic item. Whether or not it's good isn't really relevant here. What's relevant is the item's core design. And what the item does is it gives true damage to a bunch of different, mages, assassins, bruisers, but mainly mainly more like assassins and bruisers who can build the item and get away with it. Like Mordekaiser is the main one that I've seen that item built on the most. Singed, I've seen it built on him sometimes. Teemo, Akali. So those four right there, those four champions. Okay, so Akali is an instructive example here. Okay, tanks could technically counter Akali previously. Okay, Akali would buy Gunblade in Season 10. That was her go-to item. And it gave her a ton of magic damage, right? It gave her really high burst and all that stuff, which, I'm personally more or less fine with that, given that it's an assassin. An assassin character probably shouldn't be able to get much in the way of health and, should be blowing people up, right? Okay. Not to say Gunblade was perfect. I'm just saying, okay, now she has the option to buy Riftmaker. Well, if she buys Riftmaker, she gets roughly the same amount of AP that she did with Gunblade. She gets some healing that she also got with Gunblade. And on top of all that, she doesn't have to worry about mana, so she can get away with building the item. She also gets true damage from Riftmaker once it's stacked up. Like you have to be in combat for a little bit and doing damage, and then it stacks up. And then Riftmaker does true damage, right? And, Teemo has access to this, Mordekaiser has access to this, Singed has access to this. I've noticed this versus Mordekaiser because I played versus him a fair amount. When he gets his Riftmaker stacked up, my health just starts disappearing, literally. And I'm like, what the fuck's going on? And it's like, well, it says true damage. It's like Mordekaiser doesn't have any true damage. There's no true damage in Mordekaiser's kit. But, and he has Magic Pin built into his kit. If he hits his E on you, he can get 15% magic pin, right? And it amplifies his Q damage a bunch and all that stuff, right? So the guy is already good at killing tanks, but now he gets true damage on top of it. So it's like, that's great. So now instead of just building magic resist, I've also got to build a bunch of health because he's also doing true damage to me. So you're noticing a theme here, right? It's like when you have these classes, or these champions, like Mordekaiser, who was basically been 100% magic damage since his rework. And then you got stuff like Caitlyn, who's 100% physical damage before the introduction of Krakenslayer. Well, now we introduce these new items into the mix. It's like tanks have absolutely no way to deal with it. It feels like every game you need 300 armor, 300 MR, and 4,000 or 5,000 health to survive, and also probably have aftershock as well. To survive, champions who either should not be able to kill you very quickly at all, or if they're a natural counter like Mordekaiser, are killing you even faster than they previously would because of their new mixed damage that they have access to. I mean, they're basically mixed damage characters now. Teemo, right? I mean, he does some physical damage. He does a lot of magic damage. Well, now we can also do true damage. Akali, right? An assassin should not be able to, as far as I'm concerned, unless she's really far ahead, she should not be able to kill tanks. Tanks should be able to build MR versus Akali and just kick her ass, after a while, right? Not in the early game, but, you scale up, you get your MR, you get your health, you get your resistances. You should be able to kick her ass. She should not be able to just melt you. Well, she can do that. Now, it's possible she can melt your health bar because, well, Riftmaker's giving her true damage. And Singed, right? Singed is mainly a magic damage character. Well, with Riftmaker, he gets access to some true damage, and it's just like, okay, right? It's like, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? I've got too much stuff that I need to build here. And then, of course, they can also get access to Demonic Embrace, which is another anti-tank item that they introduced. I mean, before the item rework, there was only Leandries as the kind of battle mage anti-tank item. Well, now there's Leandries, and there's demonic, and they stack, and they do percent HP magic damage, burn damage, right? And you need force of nature. You need force of nature to deal with that, and it's just more stuff that you gotta deal with and somehow figure out how I'm gonna itemize against this. Um, and so there's that, and uh, then there's the tank items themselves. I think that's what I'm going to dedicate the last part of this video to. So in the first part of this video, I've basically talked about how tanks are having a harder time because we've got a bunch of new pin items in the game, and how they're basically making champions that used to be like 100% physical or 100% magical into mixed damage characters, whether it's true damage, whether it's physical damage, whatever. In fact, I almost forgot to mention Gale Force is another example. Tryndamere, let's say, builds full AD. Well, now he does like 400 or 500 magic damage because of Gale Force. Or Caitlyn, or Jen, if they build Gale Force, and they can just randomly do magic damage. And it's like, it makes it creates an impossible situation for a tank to intelligently itemize against, right? Regardless of the champion or the class or whatever, just makes it really hard. And I spend a lot of time playing tanks, and I spend a lot of time theory crafting builds and stuff like that. And I have never felt that there have been so few like meaningful. I feel overwhelmed playing tanks. Doesn't matter what comp I'm against. Doesn't matter what game it is. It feels very overwhelming because there's just so much stuff that counters you, and there's so few. You don't have enough tools to counter it. And frankly, I don't think there is a way to add enough tools unless you make every item a mixed resistance item, with the way things are right now. And so I want to dedicate the last part of this video, to talking about the state of tank items themselves. Okay, and I'm going to start this off with top lane, where top lane tanks previously had access to 3 items that you could rush. You could rush these 3 items in season 9 and 10, 9 and 10 at least, and maybe a few seasons before that. First one, Sunfire Cape. Second one's Iceborne Gauntlet, and the third one is Abyssal Mask. Okay, and so Sunfire, it would give you 425 health and 60 armor. Iceborne was mainly just an armor item, kind of like an offensive armor item, and I think that gave you 65 armor and mana and a on-hit active, Sheen active. And then Abyssal Mask, its stats are fairly comparable to what they are now, but it also gave mana, and it also gave you wave clear versus minions. It would be a damage amplifier against both champions and minions. So you could build it as a as your starting item versus like mage lanes, for example. And the reason why, sorry, I'm in bed. I'm very comfortable here. The reason why tanks now are not very good compared to what they used to be, in top, especially. A lot of it has to do with Divine Sunderer, obviously, and Blade of the Rune King, those 2 big offenders, but also because current Sunfire gives you 450 health and 35 armor. Okay, well, prior Sunfire gave 425 health and 60 armor, which meant it was quite a bit stronger versus these AD lanes like Riven or Set for the most part, and Darius even, and any ADCs who wanted to go top, and Jace and Wukong, and just AD champs in general. And that was because it gave a lot more armor while giving roughly the same amount of health as it does now. And that Sunfire was quite a bit cheaper This Sunfire, the one that we have right now, is I think 3,200 gold, might be 3,400. I can't really remember. And then the prior Sunfire was like 2,750 gold, I think. Okay, well that's several hundred gold cheaper. Okay, your tank item in season 9 and 10 and 8, 7, 8, 9, 10, that item was several hundred gold cheaper and made you substantially tankier versus physical damage. And most of the matchups in top, not all of them, but most of them are physical damage matchups. Okay, Tryndamere as well, right? And you see him fairly often, both in the past and the present. And this has been true for years. It's mostly just tanks versus bruisers, and most bruisers are AD. And so now you're paying a lot more gold for a lot less tankiness versus those matchups. It feels incredibly bad, and tank mains have talked about this a lot. It feels so bad to build like a null magic mantle versus Tryndamere, unless he has Gale Force, right? But the champion is 99% physical damage. Why do I have to build a freaking null magic mantle versus him? Well, I have to build one because my item path has shitty Aegis of Legion in it. It requires me to build magic resistance versus these full AD characters. And so they're gonna continue kicking your ass in 1v1s, as most tanks are concerned. And then you also lose Iceborne Gauntlet, right? And the reason why that stinks is because it was also a pretty good armor item. Now, it didn't give any health, but it gave you a lot of armor. It also gave you, fairly decent combat, like good damage with its Sheen proc, a nice slow, and it also gave you a lot of mana. Well, Frostfire Gauntlet is its official replacement. It doesn't give you any mana, and it gives you quite a bit less damage, at least as far as the on-hit stuff is concerned. And really the burn damage I would consider to be irrelevant in a 1v1. And it also gives you a lot less armor. So if you're building Frostfire Gauntlet, let's say versus Aurelia, versus building Iceborne Gauntlet versus Aurelia, I'd be willing to bet Iceborne Gauntlet is better, because she's usually going to do majority physical damage. And if you got an item that's blocking a lot of that physical damage and is also doing pretty good on hit damage to Aurelia, let's say she rushes Blade of the Ruined King, well, maybe you can actually fight her as a tank. Maybe you can. And you're not actually going to run out of mana after your first combo. Now, I'm just talking out of my ass there. But, you lost a strong armor item that was also a good mana item. And tanks do not have access to that anymore. So they got to build shitty Fimbulwinter and sit on a tier for like 15 or 20 minutes. That feels incredibly bad. You didn't have to do that before. Okay, another example of this is Abyssal Mask. Okay, Abyssal Mask gave you some wave clear, gave you mana, gave you health, and gave you like 55 MR. 55 MR, maybe 60, I can't really remember. Versus now, your best MR item is Sunfire. And again, that's 35 armor, and the health values, I think, are fairly comparable between old Abyssal Mask and current Sunfire. So, you also end up being squishier versus, let's say, AP bruisers or Teemo or mages or whatever in top as a tank on your first item than you did previously, because you can't buy an item in top anymore that just is like, okay, this lets me counter a mage and it also gives me wave clear. No, instead what you have is these weird jack of all trade items that aren't too bad for team fights. They're all pretty good for team fights, because in team fights you usually take mixed damage, but they're really bad in 1v1s, okay? For the reasons that I've illustrated. The other thing is Frostfire Gauntlet is a little bit more expensive than Iceborne was. I think Iceborne was 2,700, maybe 2,750. Frostfire is 2,800, and then of course you got all three of the tank items are either around the same price or a bit more expensive than old Abyssal Mask was. So again, you're paying the same or more gold for a worse performance against whoever your lane partner is as a tank. And then actually, I think I'm going to talk about the healing crap a little bit, just because it pisses me off. There's a ton, there's a huge healing issue in League right now. Riot recognizes this. Everyone recognizes this. And, I mean, it's true. So Divine Sunderer, Goredrinker, and Shieldbow, I would say, have all given quite a bit of healing to champions who previously either didn't have that much healing or had no healing at all in their kits. So a good example of this is Riven. Riven has no healing in her kit at all. She has 0. Right? Remember the 0? Oh, it's back. This is the 0. Okay? Riven had no healing in her kit. And now she buys Goredrinker. Okay, Riven buys Goredrinker. And she'll like freaking get a Maokai proc every few seconds. Sometimes more frequently than Maokai can proc his passive, which is a heal. And, it can heal for more than Maokai's passive. I had a game versus a Riven recently. Me and the Riven were both strong. I was playing Maokai, she was playing Riven. We were both strong. She builds a full healing build. Okay? She goes Goredrinker, Death Stance, Conqueror, maybe even Bloodline. I don't know. And she heals the same amount as I do. And I'm playing freaking Maokai with Spirit Visage, full tank build. And I mean, that's absolutely mind blowing. And the only reason why she's able to do that is because of the state that the items are in. And this creates a big issue for tanks, okay? Because it's hard to kill your lane partner, even once you've like scaled a bit and gotten a bit stronger as a tank in lane. It's hard to kill your lane partner when your lane partner is constantly healing. And the only reason they're constantly healing a lot of the times is because of the freaking items. How am I supposed to kill Riven when she's getting regular Goredrinker procs? Even if I have scaled as a tank, it's like, oh, well, you have to buy Bramble Vest, right? And, but Bramble Vest right now is weaker than it's ever been. It feels like a god-awful buy, and that's the other thing, right? Bruisers usually don't have to buy anti-healing, right? Usually they don't. That's not always true, but usually they don't. Tanks, on the other hand, do, because tanks don't have mythics that amplify their healing. Bruisers do, or just straight up give them healing, and so tanks are often forced into a situation where I've got to build my bombies, and then I've got to sit on a Bramble Vest. Okay, well, that feels awful. It feels awful because you're delaying your mythic. Now, let's say you're building Sunfire. Well, your Sunfire gives you a ton of damage, but you're waiting on that longer because you had to spend 800 gold to mitigate someone's healing from, I don't know, a Goredrinker or whatever, and that means that you have to spend, let's say, 32 or 3,400 on your Sunfire plus 800 on Bramble Vest. That's at least 4,000 gold that you're putting out. The Bruisers having to spend 33 to 3,400 gold on their Goredrinker or their Divine Sunderer, right? And so you're already at a disadvantage there as a tank, simply because of item gap. No other reason. It's just bullshit healing that you have to buy anti-healing for. Otherwise, you can never even compete in a 1v1. And I just want to end this video by saying I don't think that tanks should be dominating Bruisers in a 1v1, unless they're ahead, of course. I just think that tanks should be able to just straight up compete in a 1v1 against a lot of Bruisers. And right now, they're not really able to do that. They're not really able to do that. When you look at top in like Worlds in Season 11, for example, it was like freaking Goredrinker Tryndamere versus, I don't know, Gangplank or some other like weird bruiser or pseudo bruiser in every single game, and maybe sometimes a mage. I don't really remember entirely. Like Kennen, I think, shows up sometimes in Worlds because of his ult. right? But you don't see tanks. You just don't see them because they don't do as much damage as bruisers, and they are also, uh, they're because of the way the bruiser items work. Well, the bruisers, a good bit of the time, get to be just as tanky as the tanks, if not potentially tankier. And also have a better lane phase, and they usually don't have the crippling mana problems that a lot of tanks have. And it just hasn't. It's felt very crappy to play tanks for the last 2 years, and I'm really tired of every champion becoming a tank killer, and not really having any ways or any ability to deal with that, especially in lane. And the healing versus anti-healing issue that has been going on for so long. Please remove Divine Sunderer. Please remove Gore Drinker. Those items absolutely don't need to be in the game. They do not belong in the game. They make every game worse that they appear in. And please give us back unique tank item options instead of the 3 Sunfires. That's basically what we have right now. It's just, do you want the damaged Sunfire? Do you want the slow Sunfire? Or do you want the fast Sunfire? That's what it's been. No creativity at all put into that. It just stinks. And so, I hope that something changes. I hope something changes. I hope that frankly, I wish the item rework was entirely reverted, because it has made the game way, 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 way worse in every way. This is just my opinion. I know a few people probably think it's better. I couldn't disagree more. I think it's trash. I think it's awful. Never should have happened. Um, but I hope if you listen to this whole video, God bless. I don't know how, but God bless. And yeah, please save tanks, because I do not like it when the only option for a tank to really meaningfully compete is not by out tanking their enemies, it's by out damaging them with broken Sunfire damage and Abyssal Mask damage, and I don't know, Titanic Hydra damage or Thornmail damage. Thornmail damage is very high right now. And I think it should be focused a lot more on, defense and peeling and utility and all that stuff, which is kind of what you associate with tanks, being big, durable frontline guys instead of, glorified or pseudo bruisers who, kind of burn you to death, right? So that's just my opinion about tanks and the state of tank itemization. And thanks for watching, and subscribe to Mun Gang. Peace.